Hi, everyone. We're still going to wait a couple minutes more until people finish arriving properly, and then we'll start, okay? Hello, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the third day of the Data Spaces Symposium, the one we dearly call European Data Spaces Day, or to the close ones, DSSE Day. And that's when we're proud to host the annual event of the Data Spaces Support Center. My name is Clara Brando, and I'll be your host this morning today. Please set your phones to mute if you haven't already. And first things first, let's start by thanking our sponsors and the Data Spaces Business Alliance for this insightful event, the Data Spaces Symposium. I believe we all benefit from the synergies that we have from having the Data Spaces Symposium and the DSSE annual event all together in just one place. But what exactly are the sessions we're having here today? Well, we start celebrating accomplishments of several common European data spaces, who we are proud to say are part of the DSSE community. Then we share with you an overview of how we assist the data spaces initiatives. In other words, what do we mean by support when we call ourselves the Data Spaces Support Center? In the afternoon, we split in 4 tracks, following the catchy motto of our event, Innovate, Unite, Adopt. The Innovate track will dive even deeper in what DSSE has to offer. The Unite track will look at neighboring projects that do a lot in terms of standardization and interoperability. The 2 Adopt tracks will cross touch sector synergies and discuss long-term impact of data spaces. And to properly welcome you to stage, I invite the coordinator of the Data Spaces Support Center and managing director of Fraunhofer Institute for Software and Systems Engineering, Professor Boris Otto.
Yes, also a warm welcome here to the Data Space Symposium, day number 3. You probably have realized that we are getting more and more concrete. Yesterday we had the Visionary Day, and now it's going, let's say, to the nitty-gritty details a little bit, because also what we discussed yesterday is, of course, true, in particular in data spaces. The devil is often in the details, and that is basically why we are here, to basically, sort these things out in order to, let's say, make data spaces happen. Clara nicely also framed a little bit what we have on our agenda for today, and I would like to take a little bit the opportunity to reflect about 3 fundamental points, also referencing to this well-known structure that I'm sure you're pretty much aware. So what's the why we are here, how do we do it, and what is it what we deliver? Well, starting with the first point, so why are we here? Well, we are here because of the European Data Strategy, which is, in my point of view, and I said that a couple of times, very, very concrete and also urgently needed and to the point, I would say, because it paves the way for a fair data economy in the single European market. And as also Ivo outlined yesterday, literally the data strategy in Europe rests on 2 pillars, of which the first is concerned with a legal framework, and I'd like to stress that once more, because there's, of course, lots of discussion going on whether, let's say, certain legislation is good or bad, and of course I'm a legal layman, so it's not up to me to assess that. But what I find reasonable and also makes sense to me very much is the fact that once we talk about, let's say, the European values when it comes to how we manage and use our data, it's of course natural that you try to put them down, right, these European values. And what you usually do is to try to put it into the law. So it's pretty much straightforward, and I think that's the right way to do it. So the second pillar, of course, and that has been touched in multiple speeches yesterday and also the day before yesterday, is that we rightfully should not only concentrate on, let's say, well, defining the rules and also providing legal provisions in order for people to behave to, but also have a strong focus on innovation. And so the second pillar, which deals with innovation, leads us to data spaces, because data spaces are an instrument, a novel instrument to, on the one hand side, leverage, of course, the value of data through data sharing, while at the same time protecting the legitimate interests of the data providers, but also ensuring trust of the ones who use the data, that the data that they request from others is free of rights of third parties and they do not violate any laws. So, speaking about data spaces, it has become clear that we, of course, have matured over the last, well, I would say years, and also definitely since we started this project. But we also need to acknowledge the fact that data space as an integration architecture on this large scale are still, of course, novel in their basically nature. And that means that we, of course, altogether enter still uncharted territory. And that holds true in my point of view, not only on a technical perspective, so on an architecture level, it's pretty much, well, innovative and new, but more importantly, even on an operational business level and a legal level. And so there is lots of, let's say, innovation also not only in the sense what we try to push in the use of the data, but also in the way we approach it. And saying that, so if we step into uncharted territory, it's of course clear that we need, well, support to be given to the ones who enter this uncharted territory, which brings me to the second point, which deals with the how. So how do we basically plan to respond to our rationale? As you, of course, all know, the Data Spaces Support Center was installed by the European Commission as a project under the Digital Europe program. And what we always try to do is putting the user in the center of all of our activities. And from, let's say, the past and my personal experience, I know that the easiest questions are usually the toughest one to answer. So who is your user and who is your customer? That's always a good exercise, and that is also in our case true. So in my point of view, it's foremost the data space initiatives, right? Because, well, they are responsible for implementing the innovative ambition, which is laid out in the European data strategy. On the other hand, it's, of course, I mean, data space initiatives are composed of different participants. So we also need, in the second priority, of course, then focus on the participants, the users of data space services. And it's clear that we need to provide service to these users, as I said, data space initiatives, like, for example, the ones funded under the DEP, but also the individual participants. And also here, again, the devil is in the detail, because there is not a homogeneous group of data space participants, but a variety of different categories and stereotypes that interact with the data space, like data providers, data holders, data users, but app providers, app users, and supporting service providers. The question now is, if we talk about, let's say, how we want to, well, do that, actually support this community, we also need to acknowledge the fact that the community, which, well, we present to a relatively small extent, because the community out there is way broader, but that the community as a whole is just as good as the contribution of their individual members, right? And I think we should strive for this ambition to be user-centric at all times. But of course, the DSSC is, well, not a consultancy which helps out with all the nitty-gritty problems that every individual data space initiative, of course, has, right? What we rather do, and that brings me to what is it what we try to actually deliver, we would like to utilize community processes in order to provide a forum for all the data spaces to come together, to learn from their peers. So we basically moderate and catalyze the community of peers. We also try to bring, let's say, what works together to be taken up by others, so that not everyone needs to make the same mistakes over and over again. And also, and I think that's also pretty important, in particular also from an RTO perspective, what we try to do is to explicate the knowledge that is out there in order to generalize it, to be put into best practices and recommendations for then all of the community members to take them up. So that leads me to the third question, after the why, the how, and which is actually the what. So what is it what we actually deliver? And that is, Clara mentioned that already, so there is a wide array of assets that we produce. And I would like to only touch a couple of things. So first of all, I mentioned it, we bring, well, the stakeholder community together. That's one thing that we do, so that basically everybody knows where to go when they have questions with regard to what they should do in their data space endeavor. And as also mentioned, we try to identify best practices and recommendations and give recommendations, and we basically package them, so to say, in what we call blueprints. So we will hear lots of, let's say, about that later. And I should perhaps also anticipate a little bit that very recently, like I think it was yesterday or the day before yesterday, we published a new version of the blueprints, the version 1. And I must say personally, I'm really impressed of what the team has altogether achieved, because it's a big step forward, I must say. Also, we have a starter kit for data space newbies and a glossary, which is always, I mean, you can't imagine how much discussions we have about the glossary, because that's very emotional, because it's about about the meaning of the terms that we use. But if we don't speak the same language, we will block ourselves, and this is not good, of course. Well, at the core of the blueprints is the building blocks. And the building blocks are, so to say, well, like Lego blocks. You can basically take them and assemble, so to say, your data space according to your individual needs. And that is, by the way, also something which I find very interesting, because we will probably see certain patterns so configuration patterns of these building blocks, depending whether you are focused to be a marketplace for data sharing, or rather an intermediary, or rather a completely peer-to-peer based data space, right? It's also, I think it has been also a wise decision to not only focus on technical building blocks, which are at the core, but as I said yesterday, technology is a mandatory condition for success, but not sufficient. Sufficient are other questions which stem from organizational questions, from business model questions. And from my gut feeling, I think we will see an increasing level of intention on the business piece of our building blocks, while we, of course, still have open things and open questions to answer on the technical side. Speaking about the technical building blocks, what I find very, very good to see is that we have more and more also commercial offerings of basically implementations of what we define as building blocks. And Fireware has been around for a long time, of course, and has a large installed base, which helps us to leverage also what we do. On the other hand, we heard also here in Darmstadt about, for example, the Gaia-X digital clearinghouses, which basically sit at the core of many lighthouse data spaces. And also we see an uptake and really a great, to my point of view, adoption of the IDSA-based EDC developments, which basically enable data sharing while keeping data sovereignty. And you can see many of, let's say, the companies that have taken that up and now offer data spaces as a service also here in the booth area. Yes, of course, we aim at, let's say, being more concrete towards technical specs and standards. And we have made progress, but there is still a bit of the way to go, so we will continue to work on that, not only to list everything what's out there, and I said that, I don't want to bore you because I've said that in different occasions, but there is this old saying about standards. The good thing about standards is that there are so many to choose from. That is always nice, but I think we should also take courage and just identify those that are used most, let's call it like that. And that brings me also to my conclusion, referring once more to the community aspect and the community approaches. So it's not, well, a buyer-supplier relationship in which we are in, but we are a community. We do it together. And one of the very important pieces in the blueprint, in my point of view, is what we call the co-creation method, which is basically a cook recipe for data spaces, which also reflects the maturity model that we have come up with, because it's probably not the case that today you haven't got a data space and tomorrow it's all there, fully fledged, but it basically evolves in stages, and that is what the co-creation method is supposed to support. So as you can see, lots has been done. However, there's also, as I said, a way in front of us that we should all go with the same enthusiasm as in the past. And I can say I'm not only looking forward to the rest of the day, but in particular to the next steps that we undertake together. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Boris, for this comprehensive introduction to Day 3, to DSSE Day.